You're listening to the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. We believe the Bible doesn't need to be watered down or cleaned up to be understood. Our goal is to provide a healing place to discuss the questions you can't ask and the context you won't learn in church. I'm your host, Colin Connor. Now, on to the episode. And we are live. Welcome everybody to the inaugural episode of the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. Now, this podcast is about the Bible, and I realize that every person listening to this is going to have had a different experience with the Bible in their lifetime. And that can be determined by a number of different factors. Whether you were raised in church, what kind of church if you were, and even just how the Bible has been used, maybe even at you or against you in your lifetime. And unfortunately, I have to acknowledge right off the bat that the Bible has been used not only to help people, but often to hurt people. Throughout history, the Bible has often been perceived as kind of an outdated book, a whole bunch of do's and don'ts, very rigid, very unyielding, my way or the highway kind of preaching that a lot of people have heard. And I can't help but think that if you're listening to this now, there is a chance that you have had the Bible used against you as a weapon. It has been at the heart of countless controversies and debates and misunderstood interpretations throughout time. But here at the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered, our goal is to create a healing space where we can explore the kinds of questions that aren't often welcome in churches. We also want to be able to address the historical context that the average preacher was never really taught and so was never really able to share. We want to present the ancient wisdom of the Bible in a way that makes sense for today. And we believe that God is moving in our lifetime to change those stereotypes about the Bible that have existed in our culture and to start to break us free of the unhealthy and unhelpful ways that we have viewed the Bible. And so this podcast exists in order to be a part of that change. In many churches across America, questioning, critical thinking, even any kind of outside-the-box exploration or thought is often discouraged and even forbidden. Now, we will focus mainly on the church in America here because that is the experience that we have. We're located on the eastern coast of the United States, so I realize there are good Christians all around the world, but I don't want to try to speak for groups that I don't represent. So for the most part, when we're talking about Christianity or the church, it's going to be in America, but I can't help but think that a lot of this will also apply to churches all around the world. In a lot of these churches, questions just tend to not be welcome. Now, it may not be that the preacher ever said that from the pulpit, but when you have the idea that your belief system is based on certainties, questions sound like doubt. Questions sound like uncertainty, and so they feel like a threat to a lot of people. And so questions are often discouraged. Or even in some of the churches that would say they welcome questions, a lot of times the answers that are provided aren't very helpful. Now, they sound biblical, they might have some verses that they quote, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they actually are accurate to the Bible. And a lot of times those simplistic pat answers just cause more problems because if the person who asks them doesn't accept the answer that's given, then you run the risk of being treated as a heretic or a troublemaker. But here we believe that to truly understand the Bible, you have to ask those tough questions. In fact, it's encouraged. You have to engage in honest dialogue with the text and not take for granted what it says. Now, we don't promise to have all the answers here, but we believe that God can be found in the questioning process just as much, if not more than in those easy answers. So if you've been fed up with the pat answers that you've been given about the Bible by churches, then this podcast is for you. We're looking to create a safe haven for the curious and the doubting, a place where you can freely explore and really even challenge the text without a fear of judgment or condemnation. We want to create a sanctuary for people who are seeking a fresh perspective, a place where the unasked questions will be able to find a voice. So we invite you to a community that encourages open dialogue with a diversity of viewpoints. We don't just want to listen to people who look like us and think like us. That's a sure way to have an echo chamber really fast. We're welcoming you to join us in candid conversations in the episodes to come that are going to transcend the boundaries of tradition. This podcast is not tied to a particular church or denomination. We want to create our own little sacred space in the capital C Church of all believers, where we can set aside our biases, our preconceptions, the stuff that we bring to the text that we assume. We want to be able to set all of that aside so that we can learn from the perspectives of others. And it's through doing that that we'll be able to gain insight into facets of the text that might have eluded us previously within the walls of a particular church. We recognize as well that many churches fail to provide the necessary historical context that is needed to understand the Bible fully. It's that context that bridges the gap between the world of the Bible and the world that we live in today. You can appreciate a movie or a book just by reading the story, but if you can understand the culture that was happening in the world of that time and how that may have shaped the author of the book or the writer of the movie, you might even be able to appreciate the story even more. I'm a big Star Wars nerd. You will learn that really quickly here in the podcast. And so my mind immediately goes to 1983's Return of the Jedi. And you can enjoy that movie on its own, but when you understand that George Lucas was influenced by the Vietnam War and how the Ewoks were basically seen as a representation of the Viet Cong, then you start to realize that America is more closely related to the Empire than the rebels in that movie. And it gives you a whole new perspective on how to view the movie. It changes the way that you understand it. And the Bible's the same way. When you can understand the context of the world in which the Bible is written, you can understand the Bible better. It wasn't just written in a vacuum. It has a culture all around it that influenced the authors and their styles. The Bible often even draws on those cultures and makes references to them, and that can make a big impact on how we understand it. And there's a wealth of legitimate biblical scholarship out there on that context, but it often remains inaccessible to the average person. Sometimes it's behind a paywall, sometimes it's just not the kind of thing you're going to find with an easy Google search. You have to know what you're looking for and where to look. And so that's where I come in. For several years now, I have been a card-carrying Bible nerd. Really, I'm just a nerd about a lot of things in general, but that includes the Bible. And so I've made it my mission to dive into those scholarly works and organize the available knowledge and then present it to you in order to make your Bible study easier. As a fellow traveler on this journey, I bring my fascination with ancient languages and cultures, as well as my passion for understanding the human psyche. So whether you've been craving a space where you can ask those burning questions that you just don't feel like they're welcome at church, or maybe you're searching for a deeper understanding of the Bible story, or you just want a refreshing change from the same old thing you've always heard, then the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered is the podcast for you. Together we're going to explore the Bible's untold stories, examine its paradoxes, and uncover its relevance in our lives today. In our first season, we will be investigating Genesis 1 through 6, basically going verse by verse through the chapters, creation to the flood. Those first few pages of the Bible are so much more than just kids' Sunday school lessons. In fact, they're actually the key for understanding the rest of the Bible as a whole. They include some of the most controversial and fun topics in all of Bible study, and sometimes my mind seems to think that those two things are the same, controversial and fun. But I promise you, they will be fun. We're going to be covering ancient mythologies that don't usually get taught in churches. The Bible's two creation stories that actually are side by side in the first two chapters. The first temple that you've likely never heard of. How to read Bible genealogies without falling asleep. Gender roles, talking snakes, falling angels, sea serpents, and so much more. So, until then, stay curious and keep asking questions about the uncut and unfiltered Bible. See you next week. You've been listening to the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. We hope we provided a healing place to discuss the questions you can't ask and the context you won't learn in church. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with a friend. You can also rate and review on your podcast app to help other people find it. If you'd like to donate to keep our work going, you can subscribe at patreon.com/thebibleuncut, where you'll get exclusive access to bonus content. You can also check out our website, thebibleuncut.com, for recommended resources and more. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.